So this is the point. Have a look at it. It's a bit bigger. It's a bit bigger than normal.
In the glittering corridors of Buckingham Palace, where every glance is scrutinised and every movement rehearsed as if the walls themselves were watching, one astonishing moment transformed what should have been a flawless royal banquet into an unforgettable scene that rippled far beyond the gilded halls. As dignitaries, royals, and foreign leaders filed into the state dinner, eyes darted from face to face, but it was Princess Charlotte who commanded attention with a quiet authority no one anticipated. When the young royal was gently escorted to her designated seat beside Queen Camilla, she paused. She lifted her gaze, looked directly at the chair, and shook her head ever so slightly. That small, almost imperceptible gesture sent shockwaves through the entire royal family. Was this an innocent child's instinct? A subtle message loaded with meaning, or perhaps a whisper of family history echoing through generations? The impact was immediate, too powerful to ignore, and every observer at the banquet felt it. This state banquet had been meticulously orchestrated over weeks, possibly months. Each flower arrangement had been hand-selected for aesthetic perfection. Every dish on the menu endured repeated tastings, adjusted by chefs to meet exacting royal standards. The guest list was an intricate blend of the highest caliber foreign dignitaries, ambassadors, key members of the British government, and of course, the senior members of the royal family themselves, each placement designed to communicate diplomacy, status, and subtle hierarchy. On the surface, the evening promised unity, elegance, and a flawless diplomatic performance wrapped in silk gloves and gleaming silverware. Yet beneath the golden sheen, tension simmered. Whispers slithered along palace corridors about subtle frictions, particularly between Queen Camilla and the younger members of the Wales family. Hints of an undercurrent that the public could not yet see. For Charlotte, it was her first formal banquet, a milestone Catherine had spent countless hours preparing her for. To the public, she arrived poised and graceful, wearing a midnight blue gown that perfectly mirrored the sapphire in her mother's necklace. But within the family, it symbolized far more than fashion. It was a deliberate introduction to the young princess's emergence as a public figure with presence, poise, and awareness far beyond her years. The cameras clicked incessantly as she made her entrance through the East Gallery. Her back straight, her smile soft yet composed, she glided beside her mother, nodding to guests with calm assurance. The ballroom shimmered under countless chandeliers, their light dancing across a table stretching like a river of gold and bone china, perfectly arranged to reflect centuries of tradition and protocol. The seating chart had been finalised only that morning. William and Catherine were placed near the head of the table with visiting dignitaries. Meanwhile, Charlotte's name card sat several seats away, directly beside Queen Camilla. Observers could not decipher whether this was protocol or political manoeuvring, but a few aides exchanged subtle glances of surprise at the final placement. Camilla herself had arrived earlier in pale green, expression inscrutable as always. She circulated among guests, staying within her familiar inner circle. She had not yet acknowledged Charlotte's position beside her, perhaps assuming the young princess would not question it. Yet anyone familiar with Charlotte knew she saw far more than mere titles or appearances. She understood the nuances of personality, loyalty, and subtle cues in a way most adults would struggle to grasp. Formality did not sway her. Kindness, instinct, and an inherent sense of loyalty guided her every movement. As butlers shepherded guests to their seats, a quiet anticipation settled over the room. Conversation softened, chairs scraped lightly against marble floors, and the orchestra's first notes of soft background music began to ripple through the hall. Then, Charlotte entered, guided gently by a footman, her presence immediately lighting the room with an understated radiance. Her hair, neatly pinned and expression serene, Charlotte's eyes scanned the room, finally resting on the chair beside Camilla. In that instant, something imperceptible yet seismic occurred. What followed would not merely ripple through the evening, it would etch itself into palace history. A single, deliberate pause, a refusal to sit, spoke volumes louder than any formal speech or official statement could convey. In that moment, the palace realized that even its youngest member carried weight and voice. From the instant she entered the hall, Charlotte projected calm authority. She wore a navy velvet gown selected for the occasion, white gloves, and a simple diamond pin once belonging to Princess Diana. Every detail was carefully chosen, yet her presence, her composure, was entirely natural, unrehearsed, and entirely her own. Guests who had seen only photographs were witnessing firsthand the emergence of a young royal with elegance and discernment. Catherine had coached her thoroughly, but Charlotte required no prompting. She knew how to nod with grace, smile with restraint, and hold her hands perfectly at her sides as she passed foreign dignitaries from France, Italy, and Japan. Many leaned in, subtly impressed by her poise. One diplomat whispered to his wife, "She has her grandmother's walk." Behind them, William and Catherine followed a few steps behind, a mix of pride, apprehension, and admiration etched across their faces. This was no rehearsal. The entire world watched, yet Charlotte moved as if born to command presence. Led by a senior footman to her seat, Charlotte's eyes flicked over towering floral arrangements, rows of flickering candles, and meticulously set plates. Each name card gleamed in perfect gold script. When she finally found her own card, HRH Princess Charlotte of Wales, positioned beside Queen Camilla, she hesitated. Her lips pressed into a thin line. She slowed, paused, and remained immobile, eyes locked on the chair to her right. Camilla, seated, dabbed at her mouth with a napkin, offering a faint, polite smile. Nearby guests watched, curious, as the footman gestured again. Charlotte did not move. She glanced once more at the chair, then subtly toward her parents. Catherine stepped forward, unsure whether to intervene, while William remained frozen, absorbing every nuance. The staff continued their orchestrated movements, unaware of the tension rippling across the room. Yet everyone watching sensed it, the delicate, loaded pause that seemed to suspend time itself. In that suspended instant, it became clear. This was not a child unsure of where she belonged. Charlotte was deliberate. She knew precisely where she did not want to sit. Intentional or instinctual, her decision struck with the quiet power of thunder, destined to reverberate long after the final candle burned out. The seating chart inside Buckingham Palace is never random. Each royal banquet is a delicate puzzle of diplomacy, protocol, and relationships. Every placement communicates approval, distance, favour, or subtle friction. When the finalised chart arrived that morning, more than one eyebrow rose in subtle surprise. Charlotte, seated beside Camilla, had not appeared in earlier drafts. Originally, it was assumed she would sit near her cousins or beside Catherine, ceremonial yet safe. Then, in the final hours, the adjustment emerged, and no one could determine who had made it. Rumours spread. Some whispered Camilla herself had requested it, aiming to project generational unity. Others suggested it was a calculated move to soften public perception, portraying the young Wales children as embraced not just by the future, but the present. The aides did not voice concerns publicly, yet unease lingered behind closed doors. One senior attendant commented, "It is one thing to manage optics, it is another to misread emotion." The household had always fiercely protected the children. Catherine and William never openly objected, yet those close to them sensed hesitation. William's silent double tap of the pen while reviewing the plan was noted. Catherine's fingers curled subtly along the edge of the paper. To outsiders, it was simple, a child sitting beside a grandmother figure. But within the palace's velvet halls, heavy with history and tradition, it was far more complex. Camilla and the Wales children maintained respect, but little closeness. Charlotte had always been polite, but never drawn in by instinct. The staff had assumed her training and composure would see her follow cues seamlessly. Yet no one considered the weight of her own heart. They had calculated every angle, optics, headlines, messaging, but they overlooked the one thing that could not be measured: Charlotte's courage. In a palace where children were expected to follow silently, her subtle resistance surprised all. And when she gazed at that chair and took a deliberate step back instead of forward, the entire weight of that chart suddenly felt very real. It was no longer a mere decision on paper, it was a message being rejected in real time, in full view of the world, in a room that had been polished to perfection, yet now trembled under the weight of one small, deliberate act. Charlotte froze. The final strains of the orchestra floated over the soft clinking of crystal and silver, but she remained motionless, planted like a quiet statue beside her assigned seat. The palace footman, trained to anticipate every motion with military precision, held the back of her chair, ready for her to sit, but she didn't move, not a single inch. Her gaze locked on the chair beside Queen Camilla, calm, composed, yet unwavering. Her body refused to obey the silent commands of protocol. This was not a child resisting vegetables or bedtime. It was something far more profound, a quiet refusal wrapped in absolute composure, a statement so small yet so precise it could not be ignored. Camilla, catching the subtle shift, adjusted her smile, tightening it just enough to betray the slightest tension. She had pivoted, preparing to offer a kind word, a soft nudge, a polite encouragement, but the girl would not yield. Camilla slowly adjusted her napkin, buying herself a moment as whispers began to stir around the table. Diplomats glanced subtly at one another, uncertain, sensing something strange but unable to pinpoint it. One gentleman leaned toward his partner, murmuring behind a hand. Charlotte, aware of all eyes, shifted her gaze deliberately toward her parents, a silent plea for recognition, a signal for guidance. Catherine met her daughter's eyes immediately, soft yet alert, reading every flicker of expression. William, seated 2 chairs away, turned his head just enough, observing everything. The smallest twitch, the hesitation, the contained tension, with a quiet vigilance honed over years of royal observation. Charlotte's hands were folded neatly in front of her, a picture of calm certainty. She was not afraid. She was deliberate, each breath measured, each blink intentional. Her silence was not anxiety, it was resolve. She wasn't waiting for instruction. She was waiting for the room to absorb what she already understood. Catherine rose from her seat, walking with controlled urgency toward her daughter. The movement alone drew every eye in the hall. Forks hovered mid-air. Conversations dwindled into whispers. Even the orchestra missed a beat, held by the tension emanating from a single quiet child. Catherine leaned over, placing a gentle hand on Charlotte's back. Her voice, soft enough for only those nearby to catch, whispered one word. "Are you all right?" Charlotte nodded once, a precise, quiet acknowledgement, then murmured something inaudible back. Catherine's expression shifted in response, from surprise to understanding. Her eyes darted toward the chair beside Camilla, then returned to her daughter, reading her resolve. Moments later, with the grace and discretion only palace staff could manage, the seating chart was adjusted. No announcement, no flourish. A new chair was drawn beside Catherine, and Charlotte was guided toward it with the same quiet elegance she had carried into the hall. Charlotte's victory was not performative. She did not glance back at Camilla, did not flash a triumphant smile. She simply moved to her new seat, folded her napkin, and turned toward her mother, serene and composed. In less than 2 minutes, the tone of the entire banquet had shifted. One subtle pause, one deliberate refusal, had spoken louder than any speech, and everyone present sensed the unspoken truth that had just landed with precision in the gilded room. Camilla's reaction, beneath the composed mask, was almost imperceptible. To an untrained observer, she had not flinched. She lifted her crystal glass to sip Riesling, continued nodding in polite conversation, maintained her flawless posture, smiled faintly. But those who watched closely noticed the imperceptible shift, the slight tightening around her eyes, the micro pause in the way she set the glass down, the barely perceptible flick of her fingers against the stem. Decades of mastering calm had prepared her for public criticism, for scandals, for whispers and scrutiny, but never for this. Quiet, internal rejection delivered with flawless precision by a child, Diana's granddaughter. The optics could not be ignored. The carefully staged image of harmony and generational unity had unraveled in real time. Charlotte, seated beside her mother, had rendered the intended narrative obsolete. The palace would not issue a statement. The press might not immediately catch it, yet the story had been written in whispers, glances, and the subtle energy shifting around the room. Camilla maintained her composed exterior, laughed at a carefully timed jest with the French ambassador, and continued to engage politely. Yet her eyes flickered more frequently, tracing William and Catherine, the quiet conversation between mother and daughter, Charlotte's serene acceptance of her new seat. The movements were minute, but they carried volumes, a queen consort confronting a moment no crown or title could shield her from, the truth of authenticity and instinct surpassing protocol. A royal aide approached with an offer of refreshment. Camilla declined with a gracious wave, fingers resting motionless on the table, napkin untouched. Her shoulders were rigid, replies clipped, posture elegant but calculated. For years she had sought approval, acceptance, and even affection, not just from the public, but from within her family. That night, Charlotte's subtle, yet unmistakable refusal had exposed a vulnerability Camilla had meticulously concealed. Kate and William exchanged a silent glance across the table as Charlotte settled beside her mother. The footmen moved seamlessly, adjusting silverware and linen, as if nothing had occurred, but the atmosphere, dense with quiet tension, had irrevocably changed. Conversation resumed, music flowed once more, yet everyone at that long table recognized that a remarkable, unspoken statement had been made. Not loud, not brash, but profoundly felt. William did not speak. He did not rise. He did not intervene. From the moment Charlotte paused, he had absorbed every detail, the footman's uncertainty, the subtle flicker in Camilla's expression, the steel in his daughter's eyes. When she looked to her parents seeking reassurance, he had remained steadfast. Catherine, seated close, responded instinctively. No discussion, no whispered consultation. They moved as a single unit, as they always had when it came to protecting their children. Charlotte's emotional safety was paramount, and her parents' unity spoke louder than any protocol or public performance. Their eyes met across the table. It was not anger, nor surprise. It was affirmation, confirmation that Charlotte had been seen, her instincts honoured, and her voice respected. In that moment, William and Catherine were not heirs to a throne. They were parents, safeguarding their child's dignity, protectors of a family legacy, guardians of a sense of right that transcended ceremonial expectation. Catherine gave a faint nod to William, neither apology nor explanation, simply acknowledgement. William's jaw tightened slightly, expression unreadable to the casual observer, yet Catherine knew precisely what he thought. The press would never capture this private exchange, the subtle reassurance shared between two parents and their child. Yet for those present, it resonated more deeply than any formal declaration. Quiet pride filled the space where tension had hovered. The photographers were far away, cameras turned elsewhere. Yet those nearby, ambassadors, staff, lifelong aides, witnessed the unspoken affirmation, the subtle but unmistakable bond between Charlotte and her parents. There was no rebuke, no frustration aimed at Charlotte, only the shared recognition of strength, presence, and dignity. Titles and history books aside, there was a family at the heart of the monarchy, doing something differently, listening, honouring instinct, valuing presence, and in that moment, William, who had once been a boy under similar pressures, recognised in Charlotte a reflection of a woman who had once refused to be silenced at royal dinners, a presence that had paused, drawn invisible lines, and whose voice still echoed in every choice her son now made for his own children that night. A legacy of instinct and quiet courage was mirrored in Princess Charlotte. William said very little, but in the silence of his eyes and the subtle tension in his posture, there was an undeniable agreement. Charlotte had been heard, and her message had landed precisely where it needed to. The words she hadn't spoken aloud had resonated more powerfully than any royal speech could, leaving the entire table utterly speechless, caught in the weight of a moment no one could rehearse. The room seemed to exhale slowly, but the lingering curiosity was thick, almost tangible, like perfume weaving through gilded halls. Most guests quickly returned to their conversations, their polite smiles and controlled gestures an attempt to preserve the illusion of an undisturbed, flawless royal evening. Yet, in the corners of the room, a few discreetly watched, their eyes lingering, catching the echoes of something extraordinary that had just unfolded. Charlotte's brief pause, the gentle redirection, and the quiet authority in Catherine's response, what no one outside their intimate cluster would ever know, was a conversation of heart, instinct, and subtle power. What Charlotte had whispered, soft enough for only her mother to hear, seated beside Catherine, was a statement that could not be measured by protocol or precedent, and yet it shifted the very fabric of the evening. Charlotte resumed the composure expected of her with a poise that belied her age. She unfolded her napkin carefully, thanked the server with impeccable manners, and even offered a quiet compliment to the floral arrangement near her place. But when Catherine leaned over and gently squeezed her hand, asking again, "Are you all right, darling?" the room held a silent breath. Charlotte leaned in, her voice barely above a whisper, yet piercing in its clarity. "I don't feel safe next to her." The words landed with gravity, unadorned, unshaken, rooted not in fear, but in instinct, in a truth deeper than logic or any social expectation. Catherine's breath caught at the honesty of it. There was no anger, no exaggeration, no theatrical emotion, just the quiet assertion of self-awareness, the recognition of boundaries. In that instant, she understood the depth of what her daughter felt, and William, witnessing this with a quiet, controlled gaze, knew it too. They had long agreed their children would never be compelled to swallow discomfort in the name of ceremony. Not after the lessons of the past, not after what Diana had endured and what William himself had learned in silence. As dessert was served and plates were cleared, a senior aide who had been within earshot leaned toward a colleague, whispering what he had overheard. In minutes, the phrase, "She doesn't feel safe," travelled like wildfire through hushed conversations, discreetly across hallways and drawing rooms. It was not the words themselves, but the weight behind them, a child stating her truth in calm and poised defiance that silenced every other conversation in the room. It was not a tantrum, it was awareness, it was comprehension, and it carried consequences far beyond the act of moving a chair. The subtle power of that refusal reshaped the optics of the evening. It wasn't just about Camilla, or a place at a table, or the appearance of harmony the palace had tried so hard to construct. It was about the heartbeat of the future and the reality that the institution, no matter how entrenched in tradition, could miscalculate instinct. Charlotte's words transformed a meticulously choreographed performance into an unspoken lesson in honesty and dignity. No press release could capture it. No official comment would validate it, yet the palace knew this had been witnessed, and the message would linger. Even as the guests continued, attempting to return to the comfort of conversation and the rhythm of the evening, the undercurrent of awareness pulsed throughout the hall. The wheels of the palace had already begun to turn. A subtle flurry of whispered discussions, discreet calls, and adjustments by aides and press officers filled the corridors, all in quiet recognition of the significance of Charlotte's calm, deliberate refusal. Everyone who had seen it understood. This was measured, poised, and impossibly impactful. Camilla's reaction, trained and carefully curated for decades, did not falter outwardly, but inside, there was recognition. The rejection had been gentle, silent, undeniable, coming not from a public critic or even an adult of the royal household, but from a child, Diana's granddaughter. The optics could not be ignored. Harmony intended had shifted in an instant. Even the subtle tapping of Camilla's wineglass or the smallest twitch of her expression signalled an awareness that something profound had taken place. It was a quiet reckoning, not a scandal, but a truth that had the power to ripple through the institution silently, imperceptibly, yet undeniably. The palace moved swiftly but silently to manage appearances. Images were carefully curated, seating arrangements erased from public view, flattering wide shots chosen for release, ensuring the external narrative remained seamless. But internally, the truth of that moment, the dignity of a child asserting her voice, the presence of parents willing to honour instinct over image, shifted everything. William and Catherine's silent communication throughout the exchange spoke volumes. No need for words. No need for public statements. Their daughter's integrity had been preserved, her instinct respected, and the monarchy had witnessed quietly a new precedent being set. Charlotte had not disrupted ceremony. She had redefined it with stillness, without sound, without raising her voice. Long after the chandeliers dimmed and the guests departed, the moment lingered in the air, a quiet truth embedded in velvet walls. Silence does not equal consent. Boundaries matter. Instinct matters. Legacy, Charlotte showed, is not only about lineage, but alignment. She had never known Diana, yet the wisdom in her actions felt profoundly familiar. Just as Diana had once stepped back from roles that suffocated her spirit, Charlotte had quietly removed herself from a seat that didn't feel right, not in rebellion, but in discernment. And that distinction, subtle yet seismic, mattered more than anyone in the room could have predicted. William had grown up witnessing the crown demand silence from tender hearts. Catherine had learned to navigate image over instinct. Now, their daughter embodied courage in quiet assertion, teaching even the palace something it rarely receives: respect for truth, even from the youngest. No photograph, no seating chart, no strategy could erase it. The future of the monarchy, Charlotte reminded them, would be determined not solely by crowns or titles, but by character, integrity, and the courage to say no when it matters. In the days that followed, palace staff whispered about the quiet authority Charlotte had displayed. One footman remarked, "She sees more than we think, and she's not afraid of it." Historians noted the symbolic significance privately. An heir's daughter, rejecting comfort in the name of integrity, altering the narrative with silence. Charlotte's stillness, her gentle, unshakable decision, would be remembered not for headlines but for its quiet potency. She reminded the family, and the world, that the crown must evolve, not only through politics or ceremony, but through the choices of those who act from truth when no one is looking. The candles, now dimmed, reflected off the polished silver and crystal like a silent audience watching, the room still holding the echoes of Charlotte's choice. Even as the staff moved to clear tables and remove plates, the memory of the pause lingered, a subtle energy vibrating through the palace. It reminded everyone that influence doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers, sometimes it sits still, and sometimes, as Charlotte had shown, that stillness can rewrite centuries of expectation. Courage is strongest through Princess Charlotte. The next chapter of the monarchy may not look like the past, and that perhaps is the most royal evolution of all. In a palace where silence is often more powerful than words, one small voice made history without ever raising its tone. Princess Charlotte's quiet refusal to sit beside Queen Camilla wasn't scandal, it was discernment. She didn't cry, complain, or break protocol. She simply shifted a pattern with stillness, sending a message louder than any royal decree. Instinct matters, boundaries matter, and even within Buckingham Palace, truth always rises. This wasn't about disrespect. It was about legacy, about a child shaped by love, care, and the lessons of the past. A granddaughter who may never have met Diana yet carried her strength in every glance, every word, every motion of unshaken grace. The monarchy has always prioritized image, but Charlotte reminded everyone that unseen moments, subtle gestures, and quiet courage are what truly matter most. There will be no press conference, no official comment, but those who witnessed it will not forget the girl who stood still, and in doing so, nudged the future toward honesty, integrity, and presence. If this story moved you, if you believe quiet conviction can be more powerful than ceremony, make sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, share it with your friends, and drop your thoughts in the comments below. Let everyone see that history isn't always made by loud declarations. It's often made by those who simply say no with grace and walk forward anyway. And Princess Charlotte just did exactly that.